This is Assessing Your Ransomware Readiness. My name is Jim Gehring. I am a digital strategist with Expedient, and I have with me Stephen Martin. He is a principal technologist. We're going to tag team this. I'm going to start this out, kind of set the context for the conversation. We know what it is, security, of course, but I'm going to set some background on that. And then Stephen's going to walk us through what assessment looks like and some of the things that he's seeing as he's out there doing assessments with our customers. So before we get started, a little housekeeping. I just want to let you know, if you got any questions, just click on the Q&A down on the left-hand side, and we'll get to your questions towards the end. Type them in during our conversation here. And also, this is being recorded. You'll get a live recording afterwards. So technical arena and tools is a lot of what the assessment is about. And when we think about it, we think of the usual things that have been a part of security for a long time: applications, your data, et cetera, and the tools that go along with that, the firewalls, the endpoint security, malware, et cetera. These are the usual things, right, that we've been thinking about, but the landscape is changing quite drastically, and the responsibilities change along with it, because protection and recovery, as an example, is really important. The backups used to be for backups and making sure data was soundly stored someplace so we could get to it, lost files, et cetera. But now it's an integral part of not only recovery, but forensics if you get attacked. Disaster recovery, again, critical, not just for disasters. And if you look at microsegmentation, data rest at protection, logging, aggregation, processing, applying AI and ML to these things, these are literally critical for today's ransomware protection or security protection in general. And so the way we think of security now is that it's no longer just defensive. It's really, truly about an offensive posture. And I don't mean that like offensive as rude. I mean that offensively as in protection, obviously. So the security team is not there just to build the walls. They're there to do cyber threat intelligence. They're there to be out in front of what's happening and to be really, truly tuned into the latest tactics and tools and things that are being used to break into environments. No different than the releases that we get for new zero-day problems that are impacting our security every day. So this is required. You can't just put up firewalls. You can't just have malware. You have to have a lot more, and it has to be a consistent process where you're working to be out in front of these things so that you're sustaining a strong security posture. It's a new world, and we're all dealing with it. And there's a good reason for that. These are the statistics from the FBI. They come out in March, so they haven't got to 2021 yet, but this tells the story. Between 2019 and 2020, it went up 70%. What went up? The complaints. And you can expect, almost unquestionably, that in 2021, it's going to go up even higher. In fact, the numbers there on the right relative to the costs, you can see between 2017 and 2020, it went up 3 times. And there are some leaks on the street. This isn't affirmed yet, so we'll all get to understand this when the news actually comes out. Hopefully this is released for 2021 soon. But it's stated in a few places that they believe the number's around 6 billion now. So what does that mean? We went from 4.2 billion to 6 billion. We rose by 1.8 billion more than the total cost was only 3 years ago. Well, that's very significant because there's a lot of people making a it's going to get worse. And the usual mantra in IT of do more with less is not going to work in security going forward. So the security challenges are multiplying even beyond that. So it's not just the threats. As I mentioned before, it's the budget constraints. It's serious talent shortfalls, finding people that understand the new security landscape that needs to be put in place, how to build it, support it, et cetera, and covering hyperscale as well just like the rest of the IT landscape, this is something that's hard to come by. And with evolving compliance requirements, it's getting more difficult. Corporate commitment, they're like, you need more money for what? I mean, everybody's aware of it, but when the dollars for the budget get asked for, it's got to be a strong communication about the how and why and what's being protected, so that there's a strong balance that can be created. And of course, it's not our only challenge. I kind of mentioned it. The cloud platform proliferation is piling onto our existing technology debt and creating just an amazing amount, head imploding, as you can see here by the picture. And without a unified security strategy, unified governance and controls, this thing is only going to get worse and worse. It's part of the reason that we're here talking today. How do you get in front of that? It's really important. And finally, it's, as if we don't have enough already, it's the expanding application and user landscape. So if you look at applications connected from on-prem to the data center you're in, to the different, typically multiple hyperscalers you're in, or enterprise clouds, and now with remote work, the many, many home users, where we're protecting not just the four walls of our office, but the four walls of all the many employees who are working typically across the country. This problem has gotten huge. The doors that are being left open are all over the place, and getting out in front of this thing is not something where you just start trying to pick it off. It's something where you really want to understand where you're going to go and how you're going to get there, and take some time in looking into what's going to get you to the right place in the right time. So that's what we're here to talk about today. In other words, if you take the usual people that we have in place, we're not going to get very far, because it really is a learning curve to understand the totality of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with security and protecting our organization against ransomware. You really do want to take the time to go through the whole list, because as you'll find out here as Stephen talks, it's typically not one big opening. It's a series of small openings that get exploited that cause a problem. So doing an assessment is a thorough way of understanding the different places that need to be targeted, identify what's needed, prioritize that. And there's two ways, right? What's the low hanging fruit? How can I go after the things that are easy and will help shore up the walls? But also, where are there vulnerabilities that need some work, but they're very important, so you need to dig into them. That's what it takes really to build a sound security posture and sustain it over time. This is a kind of action that you would typically do multiple times. You want to go back and do this on a regular basis, not only doing the assessment, but revisiting your policies. Policies used to last a while. These days, especially with how much the landscape is changing due to all the malicious actors, is something you want to do on a regular basis. So there's lots to do. And that's what we're here to talk about today, a ransomware assessment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen. Stephen, floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Jim. So again, my name is Stephen Martin. I'm a principal technologist here at Expedient. I've been here for about 6 years and spent most of that time building out new client environments, but I've got about 20 years of IT experience from the help desk all the way to where I am now. So I've recognized a lot of you that are in the chat from my time in delivery. So it's good to see you guys here. So we're here today to talk about our ransomware assessment. The NIST cybersecurity framework, it's an industry standard approach that you can follow to assess and protect your organization's data. And our ransomware assessment uses a guided interview-based approach to assess your current posture against that framework. We'll meet with members of your organization and ask a series of questions about where you stand in different areas. And by involving members of both the business and technology sides of the house, we routinely identify gaps in the business's perception and the realities of the technology. On every single one of these that we've done, there have been instances where a CTO or a compliance officer has said, absolutely, yes, we're doing that. And a security or a network engineer speaks up and says, actually, we're not, for reasons of either budget or time or otherwise. So the assessment looks at your cybersecurity preparedness, specifically geared towards protecting you against a ransomware attack, but all sorts of cybersecurity threats. And we look at areas of organizational discipline as well as technology. And organizational discipline means your people, your policies, and your procedures. We'll look at proactive areas to help you identify, protect, and detect, as well as reactive areas to help you respond and recover in the event of an attack. For instance, are you training your people? Do you have the required documentation stored somewhere, but offline, but quickly accessible? Does your organizational policy and procedures set you up for success? Do you have the technology in place to protect and observe your network? And if something happens, are you prepared with both a plan and the technology that lets you quickly act and recover? So when we look at organizational discipline, we find many instances where a vital policy or procedure doesn't exist, and a lack of a security policy is bad. However, we often also find well-intentioned policies and procedures that create such a negative user experience, it encourages shortcuts and end-user behavior that puts you at a greater risk. We must ensure that policy and procedure is written in such a way that it produces the desired result of securing your organization without being so burdensome that end users are encouraged to find ways to circumvent it by involving your user community in crafting security policy. We must also make sure that the reasons behind policies are documented front and center, a solid security training plan that helps everyone in the organization make the connection between security risks to your organization and how their role plays a part in mitigating those risks is vital. Cooperation between the technology sides of the house and the business sides of the house, along with relevant training, yield good organizational discipline. So let's take a look at what can happen when those aren't present. And we're going to look at the anatomy of an attack. So we've been conditioned by TV and movies to think that the bad guys are hackers in a dark room in front of a green screen terminal so bright that it's actually projecting the characters on their face, and they're deftly exploiting carefully crafted firewalls and security measures. And that's usually not the case. The greatest risk to your organization, and this is an example based off of a real attack, thankfully conducted by a penetration testing team and not a real attacker, the threat looks more like this. A recruiting team with a shared mailbox complains about being unable to remember the password to their shared mailbox due to it being composed according to complex, burdensome organizational password requirements. So the director of HR asks a help desk analyst to change it to something more easily remembered. And what could be more easily remembered than the username? It's just the careers mailbox. What could go wrong? Well, first, the attacker gained access to the mailbox, the existence of which was advertised all over the internet via Outlook, and they gained access via Outlook web access. They used OWA to dump the global address book. They used that global address book to look for job titles and pick high-value accounts to target for the real attack, and used Outlook web access to guess passwords against those accounts. Upon successfully guessing a password for a high-value account, they used that password to access Citrix XenApp, the existence of which was found by dumping the organization's DNS zone. In Citrix XenApp, Internet Explorer was a published app from which they were able to launch a command prompt by navigating to file C Windows cmd.exe. And now they had a command prompt running as a privileged user. Game over. Had this been a real bad guy, by the morning, your data would be encrypted and you would be in for a very long day or week or more. This is what a real attack looks like. It's not some hacker sitting in a room. It's just organizational discipline and little flaws that add up. But you might ask, how did they guess the account of the privileged user? Surely a privileged user had a complex password that met those organizational security requirements. Actually, no. That privileged user was in the middle of deploying a new system, and testing it required typing in login credentials over and over. They were so frustrated about having to type in a 16-character secure password on a mobile device that they had just manually set their account's password to password. A poorly crafted security policy and a lack of user understanding of their role in organizational security, that's the type of thing that can lead to breaches. Myths about, for instance, what makes a secure password have single-handedly propped up the Post-it note industry for about 20 years or more. So how do we solve this? How do we solve problems like this? With better training and better policies. And we're going to take a look at this through the lens of passwords. This image, courtesy of Randall Monroe of XKCD, is an excellent example of where better techniques succeed where traditional passwords fail. When we train people with the same tips to create a password within the constraint of common organizational requirements, they end up using commonly understood patterns, and commonly understood patterns reduce complexity, and that reduces security. Passphrases, meanwhile, tend to be longer, and due to the nature of them using spaces or special characters or different character types, are therefore more secure. And there's two main types of a passphrase. The first, shown in this comic, is commonly called a random common word or a diceware password. Imagine that you have 4 to 6 very many-sided dice with common words on them. You roll the dice, you get a combination of these common words, such as correct horse battery staple, and you end up with a very secure, very easily remembered password, no Post-it note required. But the complexity makes that password much more unlikely to be guessed. In the example given, the complex password can be cracked in 3 days at 1,000 guesses a second, but the common word password would take 550 years. Another way that you can use a passphrase is with sentence passphrases. These can be things like song lyrics or the address of the place where you propose to your spouse, or a line from a famous motivational speech like this one. It's easily remembered, it's easily typed, but at 38 characters, missing cases and special characters and spaces, I feel pretty good that in 200 trillion years, my company's data won't have much value anyway. So we've talked about organizational discipline. We've talked about looking at how are we crafting policies? Do we have policies? And an example of how we can craft our policies in a way that encourages our users to follow them. Now let's talk about technology. So we're going to review whether or not you have the right technology in place to secure your organization. We'll cover areas such as network security, SIEM, backups, and disaster recovery. Asking questions to ensure that you have the right technology to solve the need, whether you're using your current investments correctly, and how to close the gaps that we find. So we're going to look at network security. And in a multi-cloud world like the one we live in, network security requires a multi-cloud approach. We'll help you take a look at your organization and understand whether or not your current network security technology and approach is sufficient in setting you up for success, or if you need to take a new approach. And we'll look at areas such as how many firewall platforms are you managing and in how many places? How are you managing them? Do you know what your normal business traffic looks like so that you can recognize malicious traffic? Are you minimizing opportunities for lateral spread with technologies such as microsegmentation? And do you know what vulnerabilities are present in your infrastructure and are exposed? We'll also talk about SIEM and gaining better security through data visibility. As the great philosopher Tom Mayatzi, better known as Clack on Car Talk, once famously said, "Data are a thing." And as someone else slightly less famously said, "Now, where did I leave that thing?" Because the fun part of ADHD is always playing hide and seek with something. But with SIEM, you never need to play hide and seek with your data. You'll know where it is when you have it. So we will talk to you about how are you handling all of the different log generators across your clouds or on-prem environment. We'll talk about your organization's ability to detect, analyze, and alert by looking at your log collection processes with questions like, are you centrally gathering logs? Do you have a way of correlating events across disparate platforms and device types? When it matters, can you find the signal in the noise? When something is going wrong, do you have the systems in place that bring the aberrant logs to the top? And is the alerting generated by your SIEM or by your logging relevant and actionable? We'll also talk about backups. Backups save time and money. People make mistakes, files are deleted, and although we never develop against prod, production tables get dropped. That's why backups are important. They save your organization the time and money spent to recreate work products and provide peace of mind that simple mistakes and human errors are no cause for panic. And in the event that an attack is contained by a well-segmented network, they allow you to quickly recover an affected machine so you can get on with your business while your security team or partners analyze the compromised host. So we'll address areas like, do your backups meet the requirements set by internal or external stakeholders? Do you know what your RPOs are for backups? Do you know whether or not you're meeting them? Are your backups tested and are they viable? An untested backup does not exist. If you have not tested that you can restore the backup, you might as well act as if you have no backups. And finally, when you need them, do you know where to get them? Is your process for restoring backups quickly documented so that multiple people within your organization are able to follow? So backups save time and money. Disaster recovery saves jobs. Imagine an environment of 100 servers compromised by ransomware and considered a total loss. If your disaster recovery plan is restore from backups and hope for the best, step 3 needs to be update my resume. Disaster recovery technologies can be positioned to protect against ransomware as opposed to just physical disasters. And we'll look at your current disaster recovery strategy to ensure that it is set up to protect you against a ransomware attack specifically. Asking questions like, can you restore to an alternate site? And does that alternate site meet your RTO and RPO objectives? Does it allow you to restore to a journal checkpoint before the attack? Being able to bring your servers back up quickly doesn't help you if you're bringing up the latest compromised copy. And finally, can you restore to an isolated environment, allowing for the compromised environment to go through forensics while you get back to business? If you'd like to hear more about specifically how Expedient's disaster recovery as a service platform allowed National Auto Care to go from hacked to back in hours instead of days, the link on the screen will take you to a conversation between National Auto Care's CTO and our product manager, AJ Kuftik, where they were able to restore their entire environment from a full ransomware attack in 48 hours and using Expedient's disaster recovery as a service. So those are just some of the areas that we'll explore through the ransomware assessment process. We provide this assessment at no charge. The initial assessment takes about an hour, and a follow-up session to provide and review your results and our suggestions for your ideal next steps, and to give you time to ask any additional questions lasts about the same. We also provide assessments for optimizing your cloud costs, as well as appropriately sizing a VDI environment to support the mobile workforce that's not going away. And all of these assessments are also at no cost. So, Jim?
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. And just wanted to end this with, before we get to questions, a couple ways to engage us. So obviously the assessments are there. We do individual briefing sessions if you want to talk at a high level about your ransomware or any of the other topics that we've discussed today. We can get a little more down into the weeds with workshops where we bring in some thought leaders. You bring in your thought leaders. We'll do some preparation meetings and come into a facilitated workshop to talk through some strategies around these different topics. Or as mentioned, we can dig all the way down in and do an assessment. And of course, if you want to just get started, there's plenty of people here. I'd be happy to go meet you at Topgolf or golf, ski, fishing, cup of coffee, you name it. We're up for it. We'd love to shake hands and get to meet folks. So with that, I think we'll take a look at the Q&A and see what questions we have.
Yeah, so we had one question about whether or not we could address what we see as future attack trends. I think the one that stands out the most to us, and one that we're going to be providing more information about in the very near future, so stay tuned to our LinkedIn page. With the proliferation of remote work and the sprawl of company devices, remote workforce is where I think we see a lot of the targeted next attacks are going to be both through poorly secured home environments, social engineering. It's a lot easier to pose as a company's IT person when you've never actually met the company IT person because you've been working from home for the past 2 years. And those are things that, social engineering attacks in particular are ones that it's a lot harder to train on because we find that the bad guys are getting much more clever about those every day. So I think what we're going to see the most of, and what's probably happening right now as we talk, is just more and more sophisticated social engineering attacks to access the workstations of a remote workforce, where they may not be behind a corporate firewall.
Yeah, one other point, Stephen, if you could make, I know you touched on it briefly, but we've talked about this and I've seen it in the field, which is the offsite information. It's one thing to have a plan. It's one thing to have that plan within reach. Right.
So one of the things that we talk about with, we ask during the assessment process, okay, do you have, here's your plan, your reaction plan for in the event of an attack. Here's all of your phone numbers. Here's how you execute your disaster recovery plan and your backups and your communication, your phone numbers, vendors, and all that. Great. You've got all that documented. Where is it? Oh, it's on this file share. Cool. That was just encrypted. So now where is it? Oh, well, nowhere. So, it's the idea of thinking about not just being ready, but being ready to actually respond under the negative circumstances of an attack. So whether that's making sure that you have copies of your response plan printed out and distributed to key team members or kept on flash drives or otherwise, or even just in a third-party document repository like Office 365 or Google Docs, that's just a thing that we have found that many organizations aren't thinking about. Yeah, and one other point that we have made in the past that I think is really critical is the point of all the little things that make up a breach. So we don't have a lot of time, but if you could briefly, it's not usually a large loophole, right? It's a bunch of little things, and you kind of showed that in the break-in that we went through earlier. So the assessment is really good at helping with all those little areas. It's not one big loophole we're looking for. It's trying to shore things up so that they don't have ways to crawl in through different things that are missing. Yeah, and I think that actually goes hand in hand with the question that just came in. What's the most surprising thing that we've seen in these assessments? And one, not surprising to us because we've been working with clients and building out their environments, but surprising to the people that we've done these assessments for is they're shocked just how many little things there are. And they're also very much surprised at how much of a disconnect there is between, as I mentioned, what the business thinks is going on and what the technology is actually putting into practice. We think we have this, you never actually paid for it. So we weren't able to do that. The guy that knew how to do that quit, took a better job. So we're not doing that anymore. So the biggest surprise, the biggest thing that shocked to the people that we've done these assessments for is just how much of a disconnect there is between business and technology as far as the realities of what's going on.
Great. Well, if we don't have any more questions, then I would thank everybody for attending. Again, there's a recording out here, and if you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out either to Stephen or myself or directly on the expedient.com site. Thanks again for joining us, everybody.